Assalamu alaikum, great to meet you. Why are you one of the few people allowed to have internet access in Iran right now?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to correct one thing. I don't know if you could hear me earlier, and that is that I was not a member of the IRGC. I was a volunteer. When I was 16, I volunteered to fight, and I think in the Western calendar that would be 1982, because our calendar is different. And I went to war every year for a few months until the end of the war. So I was a volunteer. With regards to the internet, I use a studio because the United States and the Israeli regime use the internet to gather information and to carry out assassinations and intelligence. So they've limited the internet. In Iran, people can use the internet inside the country, use Iranian apps, but the international internet connection is limited to news agencies, studios, and that sort of thing for the time being, as after the war started. So in order for me to speak with an international audience, I'm linked through a studio connection.
Okay, and I spoke to, there's another journalist, and I heard that they get some access to SIM cards right now because the internet is shut off. And so select people, only a select few in Iran are even able to have a conversation like this. So taking that valuable time, I do appreciate it. So I've been looking into your history, and I do like your way of fighting back against the propaganda. You've had some impressive responses to them trying to lie about what's happening in Iran. And especially when it comes to the terrorist regime and the creation of Hezbollah. So especially, you said that you volunteered in the early 80s. You reiterated on a recent show that Hezbollah was started in 1982 in response to Israel's invasion of Beirut, and that was finally accomplished in 2000, expelling them out. And now we're seeing the full circle story, and now there's another illegal invasion, and 1 million people have been displaced, and Hezbollah has been fighting back. It looks like it's pretty impressive.
Yes, Hezbollah is doing an extraordinary job pushing back. And we have to remember that really in this episode that we've had since the last 2.5 years, this episode in the struggle for the Palestinian people, perhaps the most heroic of all the organizations that have been a part of the axis of resistance has been the role of Hezbollah. Because Hezbollah has sacrificed itself and its supporters and its men, women, and children in order to draw off Israeli regime forces from Gaza. So they put themselves at risk to save and spare another people. Ansarullah did that too. So did Iran, so did the resistance in Iraq, and so on. But Hezbollah is right beside the Israeli regime. And the carpet bombing Beirut is something that they've experienced before. We know the Dahiya doctrine is something that the Israelis used many years ago. In other words, flatten the city and destroy everything. Just what they've done to Gaza. In Gaza, it was, I think, mowing the grass or mowing the lawn. In Lebanon, it was the Dahiya doctrine. But despite that, and despite the fact that Lebanon is full of traitors, and the United States and the Israelis have a big support base in Lebanon, not the majority, but a significant minority, Hezbollah is effectively not in control of the country. Therefore, the enemy can gather intelligence, the enemy can penetrate into areas where Hezbollah is active. But despite all that, when the genocide in Gaza began, they began fighting on the northern border of occupied Palestine to draw Israeli forces away. And that makes a contribution to saving the children of Palestine and the Palestinians of Gaza unique.
So, in preparation for this interview, and as people saw me announce this, I've heard a lot of different descriptions of your position in Iran right now. They consider you to be a major spokesperson. Some people are saying you're a propagandist. Some people are saying the FBI was going to go bust down my door for doing this interview. And, you know, they were criticizing me. Oh, he's finally leaving the Sunnis behind and aligning with the Shia. So what exactly is true about Professor Marandi's position within Iran?
Well, I don't know what it means to leave Sunnis behind, because the whole of the 47 years after the revolution in Iran, the suffering of the Iranian people through sanctions, through war, through terrorism, is because of its support for liberation movements across the world, across the global majority, whether in Southern Africa and the apartheid resistance, the resistance against apartheid. And as you may know, Nelson Mandela, after he was released, one of the first places that he visited was Iran. And he went to see Ayatollah, the martyr Ayatollah Khamenei, and called him my leader. Iran's support for Cuba, for Venezuela. Iran did a lot to help Venezuela during the last few years when the Americans were trying to crush the economy, despite the fact that Iran itself was sanctioned. And the list goes on. But the number one issue that Iran has been targeted for is the Palestinian cause. And as far as I remember, Palestinians are not Shia. In fact, as far as I remember, when the Bosnians were being slaughtered, and they, if I remember correctly, are not Shia, it was the Iranians who went and assisted Bosnia. And effectively, it is because of Iranian support that Bosnia exists today. So I think the only country that has not abandoned, and I mean by country, I mean state, not the people. Otherwise, today, across the world, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, they support the Palestinian people, and that Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus. I have friends from all walks of life and races and sects and religions that support the Palestinian cause, and I think that is the greatest achievement of the last 2.5 years. But among the states on this planet, alongside Yemen, of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran is the only government to support the Palestinian people who are Sunni. So that aside, I'm a professor at the University of Tehran. That is where I get my salary. And I go online for expressing my views. And right now, as we're speaking, it's 12:47, and I should be asleep. But and you're not paying me for being here, and I am at risk of being bombed because I'm using an internet connection. So I, during this period and during the 12-day war before, I have done what I felt I need to do. I am not a spokesman of any government, and if I were, I would not be ashamed of it. I support the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I believe that it is the shining star of humanity, along with the axis of resistance. They are the ones who are fighting against oppression, the empire, on behalf of humanity. And they are making enormous sacrifices for the Palestinian people. But it's not just the Palestinian people, it goes beyond that, because this is an empire that is strangling the people of Cuba as we speak. And our stance against empire is not just about Palestine. It's not just about Cuba. It's not just about Venezuela. It is about the Epstein class. It is about the Zionist oligarchy. It is about an oppressive empire that crushes people across the world in order to maintain its wealth and power. But the struggle in Palestine is symbolic of all of that. And thus, I think that anyone who believes the propaganda of Iran for the last 47 years, and I understand when Americans believe it, because the propaganda in the United States is so overwhelming. But I would request that they look at Palestine, and the reality is that Iran and the Axis of Resistance are the only ones who oppose the genocide, actively oppose genocide. Everyone else is doing business. Everyone else has ties with the Israeli regime. They export and import, they have political ties, military ties, and the Iranians and the Axis of Resistance are suffering. They get sanctioned, they get wars imposed upon them. They have military terrorist groups that have military capabilities used by, foreign powers to undermine the country. So for 47 years, Iran's sin has been that it opposes ethnic cleansing in Palestine. It opposes apartheid. It opposes genocide. And those who antagonize Iran, right now they're bombing Tehran. Those who antagonize the Islamic Republic of Iran, they are the ones who support genocide. They support ethnic cleansing. They support apartheid. So I think if you just take that piece into consideration, that piece of reality into consideration, that should really raise questions about the entire narrative on Iran. Whether that narrative is produced in the West or it is produced by Western proxies in our part of the world, such as Saudi Arabia or Qatar, or even other countries which are in the American camp and may not necessarily be oil and gas rich.
So the good example of what you're talking about is I keep trying to reiterate that we should show solidarity, especially with the people of Iran that are supporting the Axis of Resistance. And I posted a video of Yahya Sinwar, rest in peace, and he said, Lala Dam Iran. He was talking about how the rest of the Arab world, when the Palestinians needed them most, they were silent, they were gone. This is Yahya Sinwar, and saying that Iran, they were the ones supporting. And so maybe you've seen some of this, but people are being very critical and they're very upset. They have a lot to say about Iran, but let's look at the Sunnis of Palestine, who were very honest and were very clear to mention the support that they got from Iran. And that's very important to remember. I want to ask you first, what do you think is the major misunderstanding? What's the propaganda that most Americans do not seem to realize about Iran right now?
Well, first, I would advise all of your viewers to read a book. There are not many good books on Iran in English. There's a book that was written by two people who worked in the White House in the National Security Council. One was the head of the Middle East, as it's called. I would call it West Asia and North Africa, but anyway. One was in charge of the Persian Gulf. They met in the White House and they married as a result. And their names are Flint and Hillary Leverett. Flint is a Catholic. Hillary is Jewish. Two very knowledgeable people, two very decent people who wrote a book on Iran called Going to Tehran. It's not a new book. It's somewhat old. It's 7, 8, 9 years old, I guess. But I think if someone wants to learn about the history of the revolution, that is a good book to start with. I may not agree with everything in the book, but it is a very fairly written text. It's not written by an Iranian. It's not written by someone from this part of the world. It was written by two people who worked in the center of power. So going to Tehran by Flint and Hilary Leverett, I think, is a good starting point. There are many misconceptions about Iran in the West and in the Arab world. In the Arab world, I think the best example would be Syria, where I think it's quite obvious that the project in Syria, now it's becoming clear that Iran was right all along, and that the project in Syria was all about Western domination and subverting the axis of resistance. And for Iran, it was not important who was in charge of Syria or what sect that person was from or what religion that person was from. Iran wanted to prevent the United States and the Israeli regime from controlling Syria. And sadly, Erdogan, Abdullah in Jordan, and these oil and gas rich regimes in the Persian Gulf were working with Americans to undermine Syria. And at the end of the day, Jake Sullivan, who on February the 12th, 2012, sent an email to Hillary Clinton saying Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. The Al-Qaeda that we are told carried out 9/11 a decade earlier. He basically is admitted that Al-Qaeda and people like Jolani were in the American camp. And Iran knew from the very beginning that the project was to undermine Syria with the Israeli regime. So if the struggle in Syria was a struggle about confronting empire. But some people became so obsessed against Iran, and that was through Qatari money, Saudi money, and other finances who tried to make this sectarian, whereas it had nothing to do with sectarianism. To the north of Iran is a Shia country called the Republic of Azerbaijan. It is an ally of the Israeli regime, and we have very poor relations. But on the other hand, countries in the Arab world that are more distant from the Israeli regime, who are more critical of the Israeli regime, like Algeria. Iran has good relations with Algeria. So that is one misconception. And I think that these Qatar and Saudi Arabia and other proxies of the United States did a good job in creating this divide to the benefit of the United States and to the benefit of their own dictatorships and their own regimes. Because by creating a Shia-Sunni divide, by making this sectarian, they justify their own inaction. Because when Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Ansarullah, the Iraqi resistance, and others, when they're resisting in Turkey under Erdogan or Qatar or Saudi Arabia or Jordan are doing nothing, then they look bad. So what is the best way to justify their inaction? To slander others, to create division. That way, no matter what the resistance does, people look away and do not support it, and therefore their inaction can be continued without them paying a price. So that is our part of the world. In the United States, I think the biggest question is Iran being run by mad mullahs, perhaps. For older people, the embassy takeover, I think that probably for younger people is not all that important because they may not remember that period in history. But let me swiftly go through a very brief history of Iran. But again, I insist that your audience read that book. There are other, I'm sure there are other good books, but that I think is a very good book to start with. In 1953, Iran had a government, a prime minister that was elected by parliament. And he and the public and politicians, not just him, but they wanted to nationalize Iranian oil because the British were basically taking the oil for free, almost literally for free. And so when he nationalized the oil, the British and the Americans conspired against Iran and carried out a coup. In 1953, the Shah was reinstalled. A dark dictatorship was imposed, and Iran sort of became sort of like these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf. A very wealthy elite stealing all the money, buying lots of arms from the United States, never producing anything really on their own, not even being allowed to use those weapons on their own. You have to have American advisors dealing with those weapons. And enormous poverty continued to exist in Iran. When the revolution in 1979 happened, a strong majority of women were uneducated. They were illiterate, something like 60%. In villages, it was over 90%. And of course, after the revolution, during the 1980s, where Saddam Hussein invaded Iran at the behest of the West, Iran had a national literacy campaign, and the literacy rate in Iran went up to roughly 90% in a bit over a decade. Again, my numbers may not be precise. People can use DeepSeek or other AI tools and get the numbers. It's not very difficult. But in any case, the Shah was reinstalled, and the United States helped create the Savak, a sinister secret police, and the Mossad also helped create that sinister organization. Many people went to jail. My father was in jail for 6 months, or 5 months, maybe. I don't know the exact amount of time. But anyway, but many went to jail multiple times, and many were tortured to death. And then in 1979, we had a revolution. It was probably the only real popular revolution in the 20th century and until now, because every day people across the streets, across cities, and across the country, in all the different cities, and they came to the streets of their cities and protested against the Shah. And one day in Tehran during the revolution, a day called Black Friday, the Shah's army gunned down a large number of people. And the next day, the US President, Jimmy Carter, called the Shah and gave him his full support. Subsequently, when the Shah was overthrown, so this mass murderer in the eyes of Iranians, because he gunned down so many people, he, after the revolution, sought refuge in the United States. This is important because I'm getting to the embassy takeover. He sought refuge in the United States. University and students in Iran remembered 1953. And they were afraid that they were preparing a coup to bring the Shah back. Right? This was right after the revolution. And the US Embassy was active in trying to undermine the country. So they took the embassy. And when they took the embassy, they discovered all these documents showing that the embassy was actively working to undermine the state. And thus we had 44 days of the hostage crisis. So from the American perspective, at least the narrative produced by American textbooks at school, the media, even history books, Iran, the problem between Iran and the United States began with embassy takeover. But from the Iranian perspective, the embassy takeover was a result of 2.5 decades of injustice and oppression and manipulation carried out by the US government. Right? So the embassy takeover is a bit more complicated than what people in the United States often hear. The second point, and I think you mentioned one, I'll mention the second one, and that is the mad mullah myth. Iran has a constitution. It has a leader that's elected by a body. That leader is a very high religious authority, but a highly educated person who, in the case of Ayatollah Khamenei, who was martyred, he was fluent in 4 languages: Persian, Arabic, Azeri. Khamenei means from Khamenei. Khamenei is an Azeri city near Tabriz. Just like my own name, Marandi, means from Marand. It is an Azeri city also near Tabriz. So, and English. Ayatollah Khamenei was fluent in English and he read novels in English. He was a thinker. He was obviously a jurisprudent, but he was an intellectual and he was very well versed in literature, in Arabic, English, and Azeri. And he read novels in English too. So he was a highly educated person. Compare him to the presidents of the United States. The chair of the Supreme National Security Council, Dr. Larijani, he was recently martyred by the Epstein Coalition. He was a professor at my university. He was a professor at the University of Tehran and a professor in Western philosophy. And he specialized on Kant. The Speaker of our Parliament, Dr. Qalibov, who I'm sure the Americans and the Israelis would love to assassinate because they, ever since they assassinated Kennedy, they've been, busy killing people across the world. He is also a professor at my university. So if you look at a picture of the cabinet, like your viewers right now, if they just type on some, I don't know, Google or some other similar platform, if they type Iranian parliament and look at pictures, you don't see religious scholars. They're overwhelmingly, and the MPs, the members of parliament, are engineers or they're doctors, they're lawyers, and so on. And then if you look at the cabinet, where the president sits, the president himself is a physician, and he's a heart surgeon. His cabinet, and he is the highest authority after the leader, his cabinet, which controls, I guess, I don't know, 80% of the country's finances. I don't know the exact number. I'm just giving some vague estimate. I mean, they're all you will not find any clerics in the cabinet. But you have this narrative of mad mullahs, even though there's nothing wrong with being mullah, whatever that means, because they want to, by that narrative, they want to create this image of backwardness, of a country living in the past, and women being beaten and battered and all that, which is nonsense. In my faculty at the University of Tehran, I've been teaching for 20, I always forget. Our calendar is different from yours. So 22 and a half years, let's say, I think. And 18 of those years, the dean of my faculty has been one woman or another. So my boss at the University of Tehran for almost my entire career has been this woman professor or that woman professor. We have women pilots, we have women truck drivers, we have women taxi drivers, we have women scientists, we have women in the armed forces. And I can go on about other issues like Mahsa Amini and all that, and the myths that were created around it, where they said she was beaten to death, which was not true. The footage was there. It's clear that she was not beaten. But in any case, we can go over all these issues. We have the time, and on other occasions we could continue with these discussions. There's no issue that I have a problem with discussing on with regards to anything pertaining to Iran. But before you get to the next question, I just want to point out, I'm not saying Iran is a utopia, but taking into account the fact that it has been sanctioned for decades, that 3 wars have been waged on it at the behest of the United States, and in all 3, the United States became directly involved. during the last months of the war with Saddam Hussein, where the West gave Saddam chemical weapons to use against Iranians and Iraqis, and I survived 2 chemical attacks. During the last months, the United States entered the war on behalf of Saddam. On behalf of Saddam. The same United States that later destroyed Iraq in the name of the chemical weapons that they gave to Saddam. And then, of course, these 2 latest wars, sanctions, terrorism, and so on. So despite all the harm that they've brought about for Iran, I would say that Iran has done a very good job. And if you come to Iran, and I have friends that you know their names who've been to Iran. Max Blumenthal was here for a couple of weeks, and he traveled the country with his wife, who's also a journalist and also a very smart and well-informed woman. They've been to synagogues in Iran. I think he did a documentary on synagogues here. They've been around. It is a country which, if you sit down in a bus, in the metro, in a taxi, and ask people, how do you feel? They will say anything. They can say whatever they want. They can speak out against the government. They can speak out against religion. They can speak out against God. Nothing would happen to anyone here. It's not like those countries that are allied to the United States on the other side of the Persian Gulf, where they are despotic regimes. But this is one of those myths that you will hear in the West about Iran. Again, I'm not saying it's a dystopia, but it is definitely not the dystopia that people in the West are being told. And again, my best example is who's opposing genocide and who supports genocide. The side, so it will be very difficult to convince me that the side that opposes genocide, they're the bad guys who do all these bad things to their own people, and they're terrorists, and they're evil, and they're mad, and they're whatever. And then all those other guys and countries who are supporting genocide and ethno-supremacism and ethnic cleansing, they're the good guys. I think if one thinks about it from that perspective, then and raises some questions for themselves, and then starts reading about Iran and our region, I think they will come to some surprising conclusions.
Is that report true where I read that Iran produces the most amount of young female scientists out of any nation in the world?
I don't know that statistic, but the majority of my students are women. The majority of students in my department. Let me think. I work in 2 faculty. I work in 2 departments. I'm a member of one department at the University of Tehran, and I'm an affiliate to another department. Right? I don't want to count right now because people are listening. I don't want to bore them. But I think over let's say the last 5 years, the majority of academics, young academics who are hired in these 2 departments are women. Again, this is all anecdotal, but we have high numbers of Iranian scientists. We have high numbers of female scientists, female academics, and again, there are lots of myths about Iran. And even, by the way, artificial intelligence will not tell you the truth because they do not always tell the truth because they're programmed by programmers who are hostile towards Iran, and their primary sources are Western media outlets or Western textbooks. But even if you use those materials and use Western AI, you will see that a lot of the material that is out there is nonsense. But again, I would, and I'm sorry for saying this for like the 5th time. I'm not getting any money from the Leverets, but I would buy the Going to Tehran book and read it, and I think your viewers would be pleasantly surprised.
So the narrative in America is that Trump is there to liberate the women of Iran, and not just from the Epstein regime, but you see that from a lot of the Western Iranian diaspora, which was, I've never seen a diaspora like that, where they were celebrating and dancing. There was a girl who went viral for, dancing when the bombing started, the day where 168 girls were killed in the attack on the Manab school. And then recently her cousin passed away in the bombings, and she's refused to blame Epstein regime and continued to blame the Islamic Republic, in her own words. Why do you see so many of those people celebrate the attacks on their own country? It's a confusing diaspora.
Well, first of all, it's more complicated than that. I've been to places where there are lots of Iranians, and sometimes I'm recognized, and I'm always treated I've always been treated in a very positive way. I've never been insulted by anyone on the streets or in neighborhoods where there are lots of Iranians. I haven't been everywhere, obviously, but I've been in places in Europe, and I have traveled to the United States, and I have been to California, Southern California in particular. So, um, first of all, most Iranians are not like that. These are if you are supportive of Iran in the West, you are not going to have an easy time. You are going to be harassed. And I know people who went to jail uh, on trumped up charges, like a gentleman who ran an Islamic center in southern Los Angeles called Said Mahmoud Tabatabai, I think his name was. And they arrested him, and the IRS went after him, and he was in solitary confinement for a very long time for nothing. And then his lawyer, his second lawyer, contacted me, and I'd never met this Iranian person before. I think it said Mahmoud Mousavi. I'm not quite sure. I forgot his name. But anyway, this is a long time ago. I think it said Mahmoud Mousavi. I'm not sure. So his lawyer, who was Jewish, called me and said, this person who's in jail, I think there's something wrong, and can you help me? So I said, sure. And he sent me the documents that the government used to put him in jail, the prosecutor, and it was all trash. It was nonsense. It was like his when he was a soldier, he had an ID card, and it had the logo of the guards, and they used that to say that he's a member of the guards. And the judge just said, okay. And his first lawyer, for whatever reason, did nothing about it. So this guy went to solitary confinement for nothing. And this decent lawyer, never met him, but got him out of prison. But he got a cancer in jail, and he died after coming out. What I'm saying is that being pro-Iran comes at a very heavy price in the West. Being pro-Hezbollah, being pro-Hamas, being whatever. If you're pro-resistance, you are in trouble. A. B, a lot of these people who are anti-Iran are on the payroll. You have a Persian language empire, a media empire in the West. Hundreds of media outlets.
PBD.
Funded, sorry?
Like Patrick Bet-David's show.
No. I'm talking about Persian language. I'm talking about Persian language media. You have many websites, you have many TV channels, you have troll farms. There's one troll farm with almost 4,000 people in Albania. These are MEK members, the Mujahideen Khalq, which is a terrorist organization that killed 17,000 Iranians during the 1980s, and they fought for Saddam Hussein against their own country. They have offices across Europe, North America, under different names. So the United States is funding all sorts of different groups, media outlets, the Americans and the Europeans. And these people hire lots of people. So many Iranians, so-called Iranians, are on the payroll in one form or another. And some of these others who are not on the payroll, they're people who, for example, they fled Iran during the revolution. They took a lot of money with them, especially in rich areas in Los Angeles. Well, these people felt that they owned the country, and now they don't. Sort of like some Cubans in Florida. But most of the Iranian diaspora They are quiet and they are not happy about this war, but they're not very politically active because, as I said, political activism comes at a price. I mean, look at my case. Right now, there's a verified account on Twitter that is, and it's there's paid partnership. They put out a tweet with paid partnership that is fundraising. They want to gather $1 million to kidnap me. And of course, that means basically that I'll be tortured and killed. That tweet is, it's been on, it's still there. It's been there for 6 days now, despite many thousands of people complaining. And Twitter refuses to remove it. So Twitter has a policy of supporting terrorism. So imagine if you're an Iranian or a Palestinian or an Iraqi or whatever, or anyone living in the West and you're from one of these countries and you support Iran or the resistance. Do you think you're going to get a job at a, if you go, even if you go to a good university, will they give you, will you ever get tenure? If I went to the United States, me, and I wanted to get a job, they wouldn't give me a job at a kindergarten. There's no doubt about it. So I understand why some people are silent, and I understand why some people actually would be opposed to Iran, because these people too are bombarded by anti-Iranian narratives. When you're bombarded by certain narratives day and night, you start to believe them often. So I would argue that the Iranian diaspora, based on my own anecdotal experiences, are not the majority are not like these people. And these people, the very fact that they celebrate when the country is being bombed, I think tells more than enough about their moral status and their support for Israel. I mean, you can hate Iran, but why would you carry the Israeli flag?
Many of them must be paid. It is confusing to see. What is your analysis? Moving to the war, I'm seeing reports from Iranian officials that there is one GCC country that is going to join Israel and fight against Iran. I'm sure you've seen this, and they didn't reveal who it is. I'm seeing some people say it's the UAE. Who is it?
Well, it's really not for me to say, because if I'm not privy to these things, and I can make a guess, but if I made a guess, it wouldn't look good, because people do seem, they do promote this idea that I'm a spokesman, which I'm not. And again, it's not because I don't like Iran. If they hire me as the spokesperson, I have no problem with it. But the reason why I don't have a government position is because I want to be independent, because I think I can have a greater impact as an independent person. I teach at the University of Tehran. I have a job. I don't need to be a spokesman. But if for whatever reason someone suddenly came and said, we need you as a spokesperson, and I was convinced that I would be more useful as a spokesperson, I would accept. So when I say I'm not a spokesman, it's not because I'm trying to distance myself from anything. I fought on the war fronts for this country. When Lebanon was attacked by the Israelis, I went to Lebanon on my own. I was at a hotel. When Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was martyred, I was in Beirut. I've been to Syria multiple times during the dirty war. And I went to Syrian universities, spoke with students, met all sorts of people in Syria. I've been to Iraq during the fight against ISIS. I've been to these places. I'm not afraid of saying these things. Right now, I have a bounty on my head. I'm not going to be intimidated, because I know that I've been, thank God, on the right side of history throughout these years. I'm not a good person. I'm not an ideal person. I mean, sometimes some people, because they see me online and they are very kind to me, but I'm not I don't consider myself to be a role model or anything like that. I'm lacking in every um, aspect of my personality. I aspire to be something very different than what I really than what I am. But I believe, very I'm uh, I'm very I'm certain that what I've been advocating during these years has been correct, and I think time has vindicated what I've been saying. But again, it doesn't mean that I'm a great person or I'm a great personality. I'm not particularly smart. I'm not particularly knowledgeable. There are academics in my department that are better than me in literature or in Orientalism. But I'm an activist, and I try to do what as much as I can as an activist.
Well, you say you're not a good person, but hearing you right now, it is inspiring to see that although you have a bounty on your head, you don't live in fear, from what I can tell. And I think what the Ummah could take a page out of the book from Iran and understand that there's 2 billion Muslims, right? And Iran is the sole country really fighting back right now. Hopefully we can be inspired by people like you and people of your nation and understand that if we lived with less fear and we worked together, that we wouldn't need to live under this oppression that we're currently living under from the Epstein regime.
I agree. I don't think it's, I mean, not about myself, but I agree with what you say in general. But it's not just Muslims. It's beyond that. I think non-Muslims alike, all of those oppressed, and they are in the United States, they're in the West, and they're across the global South, or what some call the global majority. And Iran is taking this stand on behalf of everyone. And that's why Iran is so deeply despised and hated and antagonized. And that's why it's been antagonized for all these years. And again, I remind your viewers that who may be saying, really? I mean, this horrible country where, they've done all these horrible things. We've heard, we know all. I mean, just think about it. This is the country that opposes genocide, and the ones that are antagonizing it are the ones who support genocide. Then let's start reading about Iran, understanding about Iran, and make conclusions. But one of the things that I have experienced during the last 4 weeks is that in Iran, they're the ones who protected the state and the country during this war. When the leader was murdered on day one, when Ayatollah Khamenei was murdered on day one, and he refused to leave his office, even though he was a target, he said, a lot of people have no place to go, I'm staying here. So when he was martyred, it took a week for the country, because of the situation, to elect a new leader. For a week, people preserved the state. They preserved the country. They went to the streets every night. And tonight, under heavy rain, and last night, under heavy rain, people are on the streets in Tehran and in other cities. Huge numbers in different neighborhoods. You can see it. Iranian news agencies like Fars News or Press TV or other outlets, or some activists who put footage of these people. But I want to get to a couple of examples. On the last Friday of the month of Ramadan, the Iranians have, since the revolution began, they have this day in solidarity. They have a rally across the country in support of the Palestinian people. It's called International Quds Day, or International Jerusalem Day, let's say. And so in Tehran, people, like in other cities, they gather before Friday prayers, and they demonstrate against the Israeli regime and in support of the Palestinian people every year. This Friday was during the war across the country and in Tehran. During the rally, the Epstein coalition bombed the rally. Have you ever heard of a demonstration being bombed by an Air Force? And a woman was killed in the rally. No one budged. Young 16-year-old teenagers, young girls on the streets, they could have stayed at home and they could have done what teenagers do. They were on the streets. The missile struck, and they didn't budge. They didn't stampede. They didn't scream. They stood their ground. And this was not the only, this was the rally that I was at. And there's footage of it. I tweeted it. Others have too. It's not in Western mainstream media for obvious reasons. Why would they tell the world that we bomb protesters? We carry out airstrikes on protesters. And they did this in the city of Hamadan. I've also posted footage of that. And they did it in the city of Anzali in the north of Iran. I also posted footage of that. People are on the streets. It's visible. When a 16-year-old girl or a 17-year-old boy stands his ground, stands her ground in the face of missiles, I do not have the right to be intimidated. I do not have the right to go silent because there's a bounty on my head. So even if I wanted to, even if I was fearful, I can't. They're the courageous ones, not me. They're the young, the youthful. And I've never seen such scenes in my life. Literally, I mean, the footage is there. If people just go back to Friday, my Friday tweets of the last Friday or whatever. I mean, during those days, I've been tweeting a lot, unfortunately. I hate Twitter, but I've been, ever since the genocide in Gaza began, I've been tweeting and tweeting. But anyway, I feel like this is what I have to do. So they can find the footage. It's there. You won't find it in Western media, but you can find it in some places online. And by the way, while there's a bounty on my head, and they refuse to remove the tweet that has paid partnership, and I'm sure your viewers, many of them have similar experiences. I have many tweets that have been removed because, for example, I would put a picture of Palestinian kids who were murdered, and then I'd say, like, I'd type Western civilization and put it, let's say, in scare quotes, or maybe I wouldn't put it. I just write Western civilization. I don't remember. I've had multiple tweets that were removed, and they told me that you have to remove this, otherwise you won't have access to your Twitter account. So I'd have to delete them. So I have to delete tweets that are, because they would say that is not Western civilization. I mean, that's the argument. I have to remove the tweet because this is not Western civilization. So I have to remove such tweets, and then they are threatening to kidnap, torture, and murder me. That's implied. And they're fundraising, and they have a verified account, and they can do that. So that is the nature of Western media. That's the nature of Western social media apps, and I think it's very revealing. So no one should imagine that there's any real difference between Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Of course, I've been removed from Facebook and Instagram a long time ago. But there's no real difference between them. They all are very closely affiliated with the deep state or the Epstein class. And I'm not saying people, since there are not any alternatives yet out there, hopefully there will be, and hopefully there will be countries in the global majority that together will build new apps which are independent, and we can move to that. But in any case, people should be aware of what these people really are doing and what their affiliations are.
Well, speaking of their lies, Trump just had a cabinet meeting and he was talking about the gift that the people of Iran gave. So thank you as an American. Thank you for the generosity. 8 boats of oil. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi. Is this true that you gifted 8 boats of oil to Trump as a peace treaty?
No, nothing, zero. Iran has allowed a handful of ships, tankers, oil and gas to leave the Persian Gulf, but they were sent to countries like I think Bangladesh and Pakistan and China and India. Had nothing to do with Trump or the United States. And in the case of India, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Indians took 3 of Iranian oil tankers at the behest of the United States a few months ago, and they released those tankers and the Iranians allowed 2 gas ships with LNG to go to India. But in any case, none of this has anything to do with the United States. I mean, Trump is Trump. Tomorrow he's going to say something else. I mean, tomorrow he's going to say they asked me to be the leader of Iran. I mean, let him, he says what he says.
Well, you
I
said
think
that.
by now, young Americans, whatever their political orientation is, they're smart enough to know that nothing truthful things rarely come out of his mouth.
Well, I believe him when he said that me and the Ayatollah are going to control the Strait of Hormuz. I believe him. It's going to be a jointly controlled operation with the Ayatollah, I believe. Did you ever get to meet Khamenei?
Yes, I have met him. Yes.
What was
On
that like?
multiple occasions. Yeah, I have spoken with him, but briefly. I'm not a political figure. Again, it's not. I have nothing against being it in government or anything like that. But I just think that what I do is, I think the way I'm active I work as an activist today. I'm more effective if I'm not in any government. But I have met him a few times. He's actually he actually watched one of my interviews, and as I said, he's fluent in English, and it was a very old interview actually, and I won't name the host or the media outlet, but you know the name of the host. It's mainstream media, and we had it was one of those aggressive interviews, and he saw it and he said, "You did a good job," or something like that.
Hang on. It could have been. It's just a guess. And that negotiations happening. Is any of this true? There's a lot of.
No. There are no negotiations happening. No. What happened was that Trump sent a message or a proposal through Pakistan to Iran, which is not strange. We've been exchanging messages for decades because we don't have direct relations. So messages go back and forth through third parties. This was through Pakistan. They go through Oman. They go through the Swiss embassy. Sometimes maybe the Russian. Sometimes maybe some other country in the region. It's not strange. So if someone says they sent a message to Iran, they've done it hundreds of times, if not more. So they sent a message. That's not negotiating. That's sending messages. And it happens, as I said, regularly. So they sent a message to Iran through the Pakistani government, and their proposal was not acceptable at all to the Iranians. And they said no. And the Iranians put out their own demands, which were declared in public. But again, he wanted to manipulate the market to bring down the price of energy. Again, just a couple of hours ago, he gave another 10 days, not out of his. I mean, he's murdering Iranians on a daily basis. It's not because he's a nice guy. It's because he wants to manipulate the markets and he wants more time to kill people and to murder people, and maybe he could find a solution. But as as we move forward, the oil crisis, the gas crisis, the LNG crisis, the fertilizer crisis, the global economic crisis is going to get worse and worse. And there really is not anything he can do about it. Even if he engages in war, well, he is engaging in war, but land war, he is not going to achieve any results. It's going to only make things worse. So he's put himself in a very bad place, and he's wrecking the global economy. But it's all being done at the behest of the Israeli regime and Zionists. And it's not me saying that. It is Joe Kent saying that. Joe Kent said what we all knew. He said that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. Iran is not a threat to the United States. I mean, listen to what the U.S. Secretary of State, this madman, was saying today. Or the vice president who was talking about, I don't know, nuclear vests or something. I mean, anyway, these people watch too many of these, what are they, Superman movies or superhero movies? I mean, Marvel movies, I don't know. But uh, so Trump, he all of the misery that is going to befall the people across the world is because of Zionism. It's because Zionists are pushing the United States have pushed the United States towards war with Iran. And so if you put aside the immorality of this war, and Trump began the war by murdering 168 little girls. And people in Iran believe that this was intentional. Why? Because this was the first wave of strikes. And in the first wave of strikes, all the targets are very carefully vetted because you have weeks and months to do it. If after 3-4 weeks, 3-4 months, maybe some officer in a rush, he makes a mistake, he's rushing to find a new target, and then he designates a certain building, and then they bomb it, and it turns out to be like, I don't know, some civilian target. That's plausible. That's possible. But for the first wave, no, that's not possible. That school was there for years. A lot of the students were the children of naval officers. It was intentional. And then Trump, and then Western media was silent about it. They're still indifferent about it. And Trump, he tried to blame Iran. And he tried to say that the Iranians fired the missile, even though it was the first wave. There wasn't even fighting yet. And this, I think, is reflective of all the anti-Iranian propaganda that you hear today, this week, last month, last year, and over the last 47 years. It is more or less fake narratives, dishonesty, the aggressor blaming the victim. Just like the Palestinians. The Palestinians are terrorists. But if the Palestinians, if you put them into a European context, let's say the French resistance, they would be heroes. Whereas, I don't know if you know this, but the French resistance, first of all, they killed lots of innocent people. Second of all, they weren't even popular in France. Most French people just wanted peace and quiet, and they considered these people as troublemakers. But the French resistance afterwards was deemed heroic. And of course, resistance is legitimate. Just like in the Warsaw Ghetto. Western analysts and pundits and Western media analysts, they are no different from the Nazi media people. If in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Jews were, let's say, fired at the officers who were oppressing them, they would be the terrorists. That's how these people are. That's how they are. But if it's in a European context, if it's to, this would be legitimate resistance. But in reality, they are just justifying their own oppression. And these are the same people, by the way, supported apartheid. These are the same regimes that when Iran and others were supporting the resistance in Southern Africa, the ANC and other groups, the military wing and the political wing, these people, their governments were supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa. And Nelson Mandela, according to US law, was a terrorist. And the ANC was a terrorist organization. Nelson Mandela was freed from jail. He was still a terrorist. He became president. He was still a terrorist. His term ended. He left office. He was still a terrorist. After he retired from politics, the ANC and Nelson Mandela were removed from the terrorist list in the United States.
It's the bias of skin color, to be completely honest about it, because the definition of terrorism, the UN definition, is violence for political or religious gain. and uncomfortable.
It's not just that. And I would disagree to a degree. I agree with you in general. I agree. But it can also be, I mean, we saw what the British did to the Irish, what the empire did to the Irish. And today, I don't know if you can find this, or maybe your viewers can find it. When the war in Ukraine began, regardless of who's right and who's wrong in Ukraine, personally, I think that the West is to blame because they carried out a coup in Ukraine. They shouldn't have done that. Then they allowed the right-wing elements in Ukraine to become powerful and start abusing and killing the Russian-speaking population in eastern Ukraine. But I don't want to go there. This may be something controversial. The point I want to make, this is what I believe anyway. But the point that I want to make is that the Wall Street Journal did on the title page, had a picture of President Putin and said that Russia goes to its Asian past, something like that. Your viewers can look this up right now. So there's a picture of President Putin wearing like a Mongolian military, I don't know, uniform. So the Asian past means that this white European Slav, Putin, he looks pretty white to me, his roots, because he's brutal and nasty and murderous and criminal, are Mongolian. Do you get what I'm saying? So if it serves empire, it doesn't matter what your skin color is. But you're correct that in general, those who look different, those who have a different religion, those who have a different, they are more easily otherized and targeted. But it can go beyond that quite easily.
What I'm seeing from so many Americans is their lack of understanding of what that is. When they hear the word terrorist, they automatically think they don't know what terrorist means, but they know what it looks like. They know what one looks like. They know how to point it out on a list of criminals in a lineup, but they can't tell you exactly what it means. And that's the difference. And that's the unfortunate truth about something like Epstein. Although Jeffrey Epstein was not a white man, he was Jewish. They will have a different sympathy and a different sort of attitude towards that operation than they would if this was an Iranian blackmail operation, because they see him as something similar. So the logic is not consistent. Right? And that's why.
Well, I would say actually that many Jews are white. I mean, if he came from Europe, I don't know his roots. They would be European, which is not a bad thing or a good thing, but he's definitely, most Jews are not Semites.
Most of Israeli government are not Semites.
Palestinian Jews are Semites, but Jews that are from Eastern Europe or from across the Africa, North Africa, and our part of the world, they're not Semites, and there's nothing good or bad about it. There's nothing, I have many Jewish friends, secular and religious. I have Orthodox Jew friends, anti-Israel, of course. All my Jewish friends are anti-Israel. And Zionism is not Judaism simply because of the fact that many Jews, they are increasing in number, reject Zionism. Just like ISIS and Al-Qaeda are not Islam. Just as the Nazis are not Christianity. So in the case of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we know that in Syria and Iraq, ISIS and Al-Qaeda were funded by proxies of the West and the West itself. As I said, Jake Sullivan said there are on our side in Syria. In the 2012 document by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency stated that U.S. allies in the region, Turkey, the government, of course, I'm not talking about the people, Turkey, the Persian Gulf countries, Jordan, they want to create a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq. And later on, General Michael Flynn went on Al Jazeera of all places, because Al Jazeera was supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and pretending that they were freedom fighters. He went on Al Jazeera and said that the US government supported that policy. So the United States was supporting the establishment of a Salafist entity between Syria and Iraq. Who was that Salafist entity? It was ISIS. So when people start saying that, oh, ISIS is something Muslim, no, actually it's a creation of Western intelligence agencies with the funding of their proxies in our region. And these groups were first created in Afghanistan. In fact, the first textbooks for kids that were extremist were printed in the United States. They were written so that kids on Afghan hate the Soviet. And those books were printed at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Your viewers can Google it right now. And so these books were published in the United States. So this ideology of extremism and Takfiri ideology and so on, the US backed it. The Saudis funded it back then. Later on, the Qataris became more in the forefront of this operation. But the West is behind it because at the end of the day, it is the United States that governs its proxies. So they helped create Al-Qaeda. So 9/11, if we look at it, if we accept the American narrative, 9/11 was carried out by its own proxy and it was blowback. If we look at it from the evidence provided by people like Tucker Carlson in his documentary, there's something else going on. And that it's not just Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was a proxy of someone else, as we know, and the story has become somewhat different. So the point is that when they say, look at these Muslim extremists, no, those people that are extremists, they're your people. And Zionism are not Jews. Zionists are Zionists, whether they're Christian Zionists or Jewish Zionists or secular Zionists. But in any case, the point I'm making is that what I wanted to get to is that people from across the world are opposing empire. And that is why the Islamic Republic of Iran, yes, it supports the Palestinian people, it supported the Bosnian people, but it also supported the South Africans. It supported, and it continues to support Cuba, even though right now Iran is not in a terribly ideal position to give any sort of serious assistance at the moment. But for us, what the Americans are doing to Cuba is just as shameful, I mean, the American regime, shameful and disgusting as what they did to the Syrians during their strangulation of the economy in the dirty war, what they did to Libya, and Gaza perhaps goes to a very different level because it was an open genocide and it's still ongoing. But in any case, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter to us if the child who's being slaughtered or being starved is in Cuba or in Palestine or in Tehran.
And the bias that you pointed out, you could take it a step further and see the difference in the narrative of the war, which is similar to Iraq, where they say weapons of mass destruction. They keep insinuating that Iran has a nuclear weapon, even though we had a 12-day war last year, and they said that they obliterated the nuclear capabilities, but this war was necessary because they could dig it up and create a nuclear weapon again. But I've recently heard that apparently Iran has a religious fatwa against creating a nuclear weapon. This is coming from Joe Kent. Is this true, and how close? For 40 years, Iran has apparently been weeks away from developing a nuclear weapon. What's going on?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. You leave nothing for me to say. You've ruined my opportunity to give a witty response. But yeah, for 40 years, Netanyahu and the likes of Netanyahu have been saying that Iran is weeks away or months away from a nuclear weapon. In fact, there's another good book called, I think, Manufactured Crisis, if I'm not mistaken, on the Iranian nuclear program, and which tells this. It's also an old book somewhat, but like maybe 12 years ago. But it tells the story of all the lies regarding Iran's nuclear program. And the fact is that the International Atomic Energy Agency has monitored Iran's nuclear program more than any other nuclear program in the world. And it has never provided evidence to show that Iran has been seeking nuclear at any point. US intelligence claims that Iran before 2003 was moving in that direction, but after 2003, there was a fatwa and Iran discontinued completely. The IAEA doesn't even accept that. The IAEA says there's no indication that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon at any time. But in any case, at least there's a consensus that since 2003, nothing has happened. And as I said, Iran's nuclear program has been under, I mean, all those buildings that were, or those, the buildings that were bombed by the Americans, they had International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors visiting them regularly. They had cameras in them. So it's obvious that the real problem between Iran and the United States is not the nuclear program. If it's not the nuclear, if they don't have the nuclear program as an excuse, they obliterated it. It will be the missile program. If it's not the missile program, it will be terrorism. If it's not terrorism, it will be human rights. It will be something. Why? Because Iran is independent. Because the Islamic Revolution made Iran independent. And because of Iran's religious ideology and its culture, supporting the oppressed and standing in defiance of the oppressor, in accordance with all the teachings of the prophets and Prophet Muhammad and his grandson in Karbala, Hussein ibn Ali, and his sister Zainab, and how they defied the tyranny of that era for the sake of the oppressed. And he and his companions paid the ultimate price. That the day of Ashura in Iran is an important day of the year. And it is deeply embedded in Iranian culture and across the axis of resistance. So for us, supporting the oppressed is something that you cannot escape. That young girl, 16-year-old girl who stood her ground when they were bombing her with missiles, the culture of Ashura was deeply embedded in her entire existence. It was a part of her existence, and it made her steadfast and defiant. And because of people like them, people like me learn to be steadfast or try to be more steadfast. So the reason why the United States hates Iran, meaning the regime and Western regimes, is because the empire does not want independence, and it does not want defiance, and it does not want a country like Iran or the axis of resistance, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or Ansarullah or the Iraqi resistance or Islamic Jihad or whoever, does not want them to be empowered. It does not want Iran to support the people of Cuba or the people of Venezuela or the people of Nicaragua, not because of their economic policies or because the empire wants them crushed. It doesn't matter where they are or who they are. This is what the United States cannot tolerate about Iran. This is why they go to war against Iran, but they don't go to war against anyone else. And this is why Americans are suffering, ordinary Americans, economically, because all of these wars that we've had in the last 20-some years, they were all about Iran. Why? Because, what's his name? The American general who was the former head of NATO, Wesley Clark? I forgot his name. Sorry, I'm growing old. Your viewers can find his name. There's a clip of him that went viral multiple times where he speaks about. Yeah, sorry.
You got it right, Wesley Clark.
Right. He says that after 9/11, the United States, and we can sort of better understand why 9/11 happened. Now, back then, I didn't believe. I believed that it was just Al Qaeda for many years, because I could never imagine that anyone could do that to their own people.
Netanyahu said himself that 9/11 was very beneficial for Israel.
Yes, yes. But also when you look at the evidence and you look at I mean, Tucker Carlson's documentary, when you look at it, there are things in there that have you cannot interpret it the way in which I used to interpret what had happened. It doesn't work. But anyway, he said that they told him that he was told by a general in the Pentagon that they wanted to destroy 7 countries in 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. People can watch this. It's a clip. I may be getting it a bit wrong, but I think I'm right. And it would end with Iran. So they'd go after Syria and Libya and all these countries that they've destroyed, and it would end with Iran. So the end against Zionist expansionism. And if you look at the U.S. ambassador to occupied Palestine, what he said, that if Israel takes the region, fine with him, and they are, of course, the most moral army in the world, that is the unofficial policy of the Epstein class. That is the unofficial policy of the Epstein regime.
That's a great point, that it's just the fact that Iran is fighting against that empire, because the fact you point that out and you realize that in this war, they've used every single narrative to try to justify this war. First, it was liberating the women. Then Trump goes on the Jake Paul podcast and says that the people in Iran, they throw gays off the roof and gays can live in America. Then they say it's because they want to free the protesters and make Iran great again. Then it's because it's a nuclear weapon. Then Rubio says that they were posing a threat on Israel and they didn't pose an imminent threat on the U.S. They tried every single angle. They throw everything.
And then the vice president said something about nuclear vests or some other madness.
That was just 2 hours ago, talking about suicide bombers and vests. So this war, we've seen them try every single tactic, hoping something sticks. And it goes back to the overall point. I mean, Iran has their own banks, and they're not involved in the Rothschild central bank system, similar to Cuba, who's getting strangled right now, and they turn the lights off. This is something that,
I mean, it's really interesting. I've been to Cuba, and I've been to Venezuela multiple times. And actually today I was speaking to a couple of my Venezuelan friends. I was supposed to go to Venezuela just a few weeks ago, but I stayed because I thought there would be war, and I thought I should stay here. But it was right before they attacked Venezuela. Anyway, and kidnapped the president. Anyway. But the point is that one of the interesting things is Iran is a regime, Venezuela is a regime, Cuba is a regime, but Saudi Arabia is not a regime. Israel is not a regime. Qatar is not a regime. Jordan is not a regime. The word regime is left for these countries. And then they say, look, I mean, Venezuela is a failed state. No, you put your boot on their neck. You don't let them breathe. And then you say, look, they can't even breathe. Look, they're failures. They impose sanctions on Syria, imposed a dirty war, bringing in tens of thousands of crazy terrorists. And then they say, look at what they did to their country. They do the same to Libya. They do the same to Cuba. They strangle Cuba and say, look, I'm not saying that communism is an ideal model or socialism or liberalism. That's not the point. I have the ideology that I believe in as a Muslim, and of course the theme of supporting the press and that being so deep in our culture. I believe in social justice, and a strong element of social justice should be a part of the workings of any state. Doesn't mean I'm against the private sector, but I believe in social justice. But I'm not talking about communism or socialism or liberalism. A country, a state, is defiant of the empire. Whether it is a liberal state or a socialist state or a communist state, whether it's Russia or Venezuela or Cuba, it doesn't matter. They strangle it, and then they say, look, they're failures. They bomb it, destroy it, and they say, look at these non-Westerners. They can't even govern. Why does everyone want to come to the West? It's because we're good. It's because our model of governance is good. No, it's because you've bombed everyone else. You've sanctioned everyone else. You've destroyed everyone's world. And where do people go? The only place left to go. And then you say, why are they coming here? If we're so bad, and again, I'm not talking about ordinary people. It has nothing to do with, I mean, as I said, that some of the best heroes, anti-Zionist heroes, are Jews. Some of the shows that I go to, they're online, like your own program, they are Jews, and they're fantastic. They're heroes. They are at the forefront of the resistance, and Christians and Muslims. And I think there was a Hindu girl who spoke at a student at MIT. I don't know, at the beginning of the school year or something, and then she too was, I think, punished. Again, I'm vague on some of these things. They're excellent people across the board from all races, but the point is that the empire will not tolerate anything but itself, and its best tool is divide and rule. The best tool is divide and rule, whether it's race, religion, sect. That is the best tool possible, because that's how you deplete the energy of the victim. I'm busy tearing you apart, you're tearing me apart, we're both tearing, and then the empire, especially as the empire declines and it grows weak, it needs this divide and rule element even more than before, both at home and abroad, increasingly at home, because people in the West are waking up, especially young people. They're victims too. There's victims as well. Whites, blacks, people of different skin color, of different religions, they're victims too, because the system is corrupt. It's the Epstein class. It is this oligarchy, and they don't care about anyone. Doesn't matter what their passports, what's written on the passport, or what their picture in the passport looks like.
I completely agree. I want to ask about the ground invasion. You briefly mentioned that earlier. That seems like, especially I think 2-3 hours ago, Trump posted on Truth Social saying he's extending the 5-day ceasefire or whatever to 10 days. And it's going to be strategically when the markets have closed. And maybe it's in preparation for the Marines to get ready to probably land around, the small island called Karba, if I'm not mistaken, around the Strait of Hormuz.
Or it could be another island. No one knows. I mean, they could be saying one island and intending to land somewhere else. But yes, it's called Khark Island.
And how would this ground invasion go? Because we're aware that Iran is surrounded by these giant mountains, and Iran, the IRGC, they've been preparing for this war for decades. How would this ground invasion go? Because right now, as Americans, we don't really understand what the objectives are with this war. It's shifted. Once it was going to be regime change, and now they're saying regime change is just killing the Ayatollah, and then now a new Ayatollah is in charge. There's not a real victory strategy, and a ground invasion is going to be a disaster. They're prepared. They've set traps. They set mines. Iran has not been very secretive. They lay it out there. They say, come and get us. If you guys wanted to come here, we'll come. How is that ground invasion going to go if it does happen? Do you think it will?
If U.S. analysts had really studied Iran and Yemen and Hezbollah and the axis of resistance in general in Palestine, in Iraq, if they had studied them and understood the culture of resistance and where it came from, where it comes from, and I gave you an example of the young girls and young boys and on the streets of Tehran and elsewhere who, under airstrikes, they stand their ground. The footage is there. People can watch it. It's just mind-boggling. The courage of these kids, it comes from this culture of resistance. It comes from this belief in God and a just God and the tradition of all the prophets. And of course, as I said, the story of Karbala is very deeply embedded in this culture. It's the resilience of this people more than the weapons, because at the end of the day, the empire has more weapons. They have the entire region working for them. I mean, all these Arab family dictatorships, they're all traitors. Their money goes to Western banks, and they're all corrupt. And they're also in the Epstein documents too, many of them. I mean, they have American bases, whether it's Jordan. I mean, it's not just the Persian Gulf. Jordan has U.S. bases. They're hosting U.S. jets. They're helping with attack Iran. Turkey allows, Turkey exports oil to Netanyahu, or transports oil from Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a key ally. Turkey allows NATO planes to fly AWACS to gather intelligence. So they're all working. So it's like this axis of resistance against the entire West and its regional proxies, the collective West. So the axis must be defeated, because on paper they're much stronger, but it is the resilience of the people, whether in Gaza, whether in Lebanon, whether in Yemen. I mean, the Yemenis were bombed for 7 weeks. And they too were heroic, like Hezbollah. They were sacrificing for another people. The Palestinians, of course, heroic, but they're fighting for themselves, for their lives, for their existence. A legitimate fight, obviously. Just like the South Africans were. A foreign entity takes their land, expels them, kills them. They resist. But Yemen was struggling to help the Palestinians, and they were murdered and bombed as a result, because they were saying, don't kill these people. For 7 weeks, they stood their ground too. If the Americans did their research, they would recognize that it's not just about guns. Of course, the Iranians have shown genius and brilliance. They've developed their own indigenous technology, their defense missile capabilities, and so on are extraordinary. They have weapons that the United States simply does not have, despite all the sanctions, despite all the punishment that the collective West tries to impose on the country with the help of their proxies for all these decades. But ultimately, it is that resilience, that resistance, and that is what makes the axis of resistance so heroic and so formidable as a force against the Epstein class.
So what was your personal experience like volunteering? Did you fight against Iran? I mean, you fight against Iraq. My mistake. You fought against Iraq.
Yes, in 1982, I was 16, and I volunteered at that. When you're sick during that period, when you're 16, you have to be interviewed. You can't just volunteer and go to war. So they interviewed you to see if you're like mature enough, or if they believe that you're mature enough. Some of my classmates, they were accepted, like my friends, not just my classmates. They were allowed to go and get training and go to war. Some were not, even though they were just as mature, maybe, but they thought that it was too soon for them. So you have to go through this interview process. And then if you are accepted, then you go through training. And then after training, you go to war. But since you're a volunteer, you can quit whenever you want. It's not when you go, if you don't like it, or if you fighting a war or being under fire is not your thing, you don't have to stay. And the bulk of the war was fought by volunteers because we were sanctioned. Saddam was provided with everything, all the latest weapons and technology and chemical weapons, and we were even blocked from purchasing gas masks. So you had to have this resilience, this faith, this belief in resistance. And again, during the war, the culture of Ashura was a key component in us being able to confront Saddam Hussein, because the entire world was behind him, and we were alone. All these Arab family dictatorships back then gave him hundreds of billions of dollars. The West gave him chemical weapons. The human rights people in the West, who never apologized. In one instance, in northern Iraq, Saddam carried out a chemical attack against the city of Halabja and killed 6,500 people within minutes. Was he condemned? No. Did the UN Security Council do anything? No. Did Western governments sanction him? No. They continued to support him. Iran took Western journalists to see the town and the massacre. Just a couple of reports in the newspaper, and that was it. So people, I mean, if for my generation, people like me who saw these things, it's easy to comprehend to understand that the West political regimes are evil. But for young people in Iran, a lot of them had many questions. And ironically, the war and the murder, the bombing of so many hospitals and schools, and no one apologizes. When they bombed the school, have you heard any American government official apologize? No, of course not.
They said that the Tomahawk missiles were stolen by Iran and that perhaps they
Yeah,
bombed their own
whatever.
school.
Yeah. But no, they will not admit it, and they will not apologize. And so young Iranians who are fooled by remember I told you about this Persian media empire that's in the West that's very antagonistic towards Iran. There are more Persian language TV channels, both online and offline, than there are in Iran, broadcast from the West. That's how much money they put into this from taxpayers' money. And so they're constantly, to young Iranians, impressionable teenagers and so on, telling them how evil your country is and, constantly giving this disinformation. But now these young kids, those who are influenced by these narratives, they look and see they slaughtered all those kids and they're blaming us and they won't even apologize. And Western media doesn't care. They're bombing hospitals. They're bombing ambulances. They're bombing schools again. They bombed the main building of the Red Crescent Society. They bombed the National Emergency Center in Tehran for first responders. It's clear what they're trying to do. They bomb everything that is linked to civil society. They want the civil society to collapse because they're barbaric. And earlier on you spoke about terrorism. The terrorists are the guys who drop bombs from the air. Those pilots are the terrorists. The terrorists of the 21st century and the late 20th century are these pilots that slaughter people, or the guys who press the buttons for those Tomahawk missiles. They're the terrorists. They're the murderers that terrorize kids in Iran day and night. Earlier, I told you they were bombing Tehran as we were speaking. They bombed somewhere near here, I suppose, but I don't know. I was looking at you. But the point is that they're terrorists. Those pilots are all terrorists. They carry out double tap attacks. They bomb a square. People rush to help. They bomb it again. This Epstein coalition. There's one you may have seen. A woman is filming herself after the first strike, and then she's killed in the second strike. I tweeted that. They carry out double tap attacks. These are monsters. But of course, it's not strange because they're doing it all the time in Lebanon. They bomb apartment blocks in Beirut, and then Western media calls it Hezbollah strongholds. Why? Because they don't want people to know in the West that these are apartment buildings where 10, 20 families live in them. They call it a stronghold, so everything is legitimized. Just like in Gaza, when they bombed the hospital, they said, "Oh, they are." First they said in the first hospital, they said it was a resistance rocket that hit it. And then Western intelligence agencies all came out and said, yes, our information says that it was the Islamic Jihad or Hamas. I think they said Islamic Jihad. Like a rocket would kill hundreds of people. That was the first hospital. Then the second hospital, they said, "Oh, they're tunnels," and we knew that those were lies too. And then they just started hitting hospital after hospital. And the Western media saw, we can't just justify all of this. They stopped reporting it. And then they went so far as to go into hospitals and pull the plugs of the incubators. So when they wanted to attack Saddam Hussein, they fabricated the story about incubators in Kuwait. But in reality, the Israelis did it. So they launched a war against Iraq, and I hated Saddam Hussein. He was an evil monster. But Iran actually was the only country in this region that opposed the war against Iraq, the invasion of Iraq. But the first war, when it invaded Kuwait, which was illegitimate, that's, but in order to justify war against Saddam, they used fake news in the first war. And one of them was they used the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to Washington. They didn't say that she was the daughter of the ambassador. She said, "I was in the hospital and they pulled the plugs on the incubators and threw out the babies and took them, the Iraqis, in order to demonize Iraq and Americans to make the case for war. But it was fake. But the Israelis actually did it, and no one cared. In the mainstream media, ordinary people did. Young Americans are overwhelmingly opposed to the Israeli regime. Their eyes are open. They're clear-sighted. But I'm talking about the mainstream media. So, or for example, the rape of Palestinians, it's on camera, but they would like to say Muslims rape or the Iranians rape. They just make it up. Why? To demonize. But the Israelis actually do it. It's on camera. But look away. Let's not go there.
And they get away with
But in
it.
any case,
They don't get prosecuted.
Yeah.
And
They get away with
protest their
everything.
ability.
Yeah, and they're heroes. They're national heroes. People, go to the streets for them. They celebrate their acquittals and all that. This is the world that we live in. But things are changing much faster than these the ruling class, the Epstein class thinks. It's changing. They're not going to win this war. They're not going to. The ground forces may come in, and I feel sorry for these American kids. They're going to be sent to fight for Epstein, for the Epstein class. They're not fighting for anything but criminals in Washington and in Tel Aviv, as Joe Kent pointed out, and he's obviously no friend of Iran. But in any case, it will fail. It will only make things worse. Iran will resist, and Iran will remain steadfast, whatever the price. And it doesn't matter if people like me survive or don't survive. This resistance will continue, and Iran, under no circumstances, will it forsake the children of Palestine.
What advice would you give to the Americans watching it, a predominantly American audience? And we're slowly realizing the faults of our empire, especially this is coinciding with the release of the Epstein files. I think a lot of people are becoming disillusioned with their country and the current administration. We want the best for our country. Where do you think we can go from here?
It's not for me to say. First of all, people who have opposed all this criminal behavior and to stand against it, they have nothing to be ashamed of. Sometimes people say, I'm ashamed of my country, accept my apologies. And I say, look, if you're opposed to this, you're not guilty of anything. You're actually being heroic. A lot of my friends in the United States who are active politically and support Cuba or support Iran or support the Palestinians or they're all heroes from different religions and races and classes and so on. But people have to they have to read more, they have to be more active. But it's not for me to say what they should do, but they should not be indifferent. They have a responsibility, and as patriotic Americans, people who love their country, they have a responsibility to change the United States and to make it a better place. And have no doubt that if it wasn't for Zionism today, Iran and the United States would not be enemies. Even though the United States was an oppressive, they imposed a Shah, and I spoke about all this. They supported Saddam Hussein. They encouraged him to invade the country. Then they imposed sanctions, and they've hurt Iran for all these years. But if it wasn't for Zionism, I would assume, I'm pretty sure that Iran and the United States would have political relations and they'd be doing trade and business. So they should oppose Zionism, but they should not equate Zionism with any religion, just like as no one should equate ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Jaish al-Islam and all these criminal terrorist groups with Islam. And people should be careful not to let the powers that exist divide them, whether it's based on religion or sect or race or ethnicity or whatever. And I'm optimistic about the future. I think that these are dark times, and they will get darker. But when you resist, you have to be steadfast, and ultimately, at some point, the darkness will go away.
Inshallah. And I know it's
Inshallah.
very late for you. Hopefully, again, I don't know if you have free time in a couple weeks. I do apologize. I did not consider the time difference when I was scheduling it. Probably earlier is much better for you. Something like 1 p.m. In the future,
Probably.
yeah, probably.
It's okay.
I wish you had told
It's
me.
okay.
I would to consider your.
No, it's okay. I mean, whatever is good for your audience, it's
No,
fine.
you're the.
It's not a big sacrifice.
Well, next time I'll prioritize it around 1 p.m. Right after Isha for you. And I want to ask you about Afghanistan, about Pakistan, about Syria, about more what's going on in the GCC, and see your perspective on
Sure.
those relationships. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, Professor Marandi. This was a
Not
lot
at
of
all.
great information. And look, it's important that we know about the country of Iran right now amidst all this attempts at propaganda and lies and trying to shape Iran as this religiously backwards place. When we're seeing here, if the religious regime is covering up for Epstein, it seems like that's what is backwards of the two nations
Did
at
you
war.
hear that huge explosion just now? Rolling explosions. That's carpet bombing. It's called carpet bombing. But in any case. But yeah, sorry for interrupting you, but I was
No, you
hoping
didn't.
could
That's please, there's bombing. And inshallah you stay safe. I know that you have money on your head. They're trying to get you. We pray that you stay safe out there. And if there's anything that you need from us, if you want us to report tweets on your life or anything, please feel free to reach out. We would love to support you.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone, you and all your viewers are doing what they feel they need to do. And hopeful that, as I said earlier, that I'm sure there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm very hopeful that young people at least will see that light.
Hope to speak to you again soon. And stay safe out there. Assalamu alaikum, Professor Marandi.
Thank you for having me.